Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com, and it is time for an Ignite Fall 2021 news review. I am joined with a new guest on our podcast, certainly not someone who's new to podcasting in general, Asif Rehmani. Welcome, Asif. Great to have you with us today.
Thanks so much, Jason. Great to be here.
It's been a busy week, a lot of information and news shared by Microsoft. Before we started, though, maybe we could just give a little bit of an introduction to you for our audience. Some people, I'll just say, might recognize your name because you did write a great article for us recently regarding digital adoption. But tell us a little more about yourself.
Yeah, so semi-new to the Dynamics community, but definitely not new to the Microsoft community. I have been around as a Microsoft MVP for the last 15 years. And even before that, I was doing a lot of community activities. I love being part of the community, and I'll continue to do that and expanding into Dynamics as well. I also run a company called Visual SB, and that company focuses very much on Microsoft 365 and Dynamics 365 user success by providing contextual experiences on top of the interface. Great to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
All right, yeah, plenty to discuss here. Let's start with a topic that I know you have been following very closely over time, and it sort of reached a big milestone here this week with Viva. I guess the big update is that I think all of the components of Viva are now GA.
That's right.
So it's now a suite, and users have access to all of it. Can you give us sort of the high level overview first of what was announced and what it really means?
Yeah, so Viva itself obviously was announced way at the beginning of the year. I think it was end of
Mm-hmm.
January or so when I started talking about it. The articles came out and all. And honestly, the reason Viva came out in 2021 specifically is I think the pandemic kind of pushed it towards over the edge where this is focused on employee experiences. All of us know that users, employees basically are, they're all over the place. There's some working hybrid, some working in offices, many others working at home. Everybody's still getting used to it. So employee experiences being super important to employers and obviously to Microsoft because they provide all the software to these employers to help their employees. It just made sense in 2021 to push Viva to the forefront, and that's what Microsoft did. Having said that, four modules to begin with is what they introduced. A fifth one actually is going to be coming in 2022 based on their new acquisition. But the first, let's talk about the four. You got Viva Topics, Insights, Connections, and Learning. Connections is the only one that's completely free. It's basically a combination of SharePoint and Teams. You're showing your SharePoint home site and all the components within Teams, so people can just go to Teams and see their intranet. No charge for that. Topics being very central to the artificial intelligence being brought and information being brought from anywhere directly to where you are within Teams, seeing or hovering over a uh, piece of item, you're seeing information about that item, all AI goodness at work there. Insights, that's something with the workplace analytics and all has been around for a long time, but now it's kind of being brought into one umbrella with Viva Insights. So now you can see yourself as to how much time you're spending in meetings, how much time are you resting, how much time, other things that Microsoft knows about you through the Microsoft Graph Insights, and then also your managers knowing how the team is performing, how much downtime are they getting, how much time in meetings and so forth. So all super important things, especially now that we're in hybrid environments. And the last, but definitely not the least, the one that I focus on a lot is Viva Learning. Right? So that is an aggregation
Mm-hmm.
of all the components, all your organizational learning, I should say, within Teams as an app called Viva Learning. And chances are that those people listening to the podcast, if you go to your Microsoft Teams and click on the ellipsis, the three dots, Viva Learning might already be there, the free version of it. And if you don't find it there, just go to Teams App Store, look for Viva Learning. You're going to find it there. You can plug it in.
Hmm.
As you mentioned, also one last point here is that there is a suite, a $9 per user per month that Microsoft is offering. They have emphasized, by the way, in a few sessions at Ignite that it is a limited time. So don't know exactly what that means, but total retail price being $12, now it's $9 per user per month for all four Viva components.
I'm really interested to see how this gets adopted, because to me, some of it makes a lot of sense from what I understand about the capabilities and the intended use cases, and others seem a little hazier to me. That I could, it seems like, oh, okay, that could be helpful, but who's really going to, first of all, who within an organization is really going to push to get some of these things deployed? I'm thinking mostly of connections and insights, probably, or maybe topics. I guess I can see the learning obviously is pretty clear cut, but I think the other thing to me that helped at least understand sort of where Microsoft was going with this was the part of the announcement where they explained all these different partners that are promising to build integrations or to allow Viva to work with their solutions: Qualtrics, ServiceNow, Adobe. Adobe Sign, at least, quite a few other, Workday. I mean, big name, big recognizable platforms out there. So that to me says that at least these other vendors want to be part of where Microsoft is putting these Viva tools.
Yeah. At the end of the day, honestly, what happened is Microsoft saying that, well, everybody is in Microsoft Teams because, well, they had to be, especially last year. And then going forward, also, they're going to be. So they went to their partners saying, hey, we have the users. Would you like to put your content where the users are? And it just made sense. So you mentioned a few names here, right? For example, Workday, ServiceNow, Qualtrics, and others. They, of course, have their own interfaces, and those interfaces will remain within the browser or within a desktop client or whatever, or so forth. But if they wanted to, in addition, show their interfaces, their components directly through Teams, well, now there's an easy way to partner with Microsoft to show it directly as a first party app with the Viva consortium of apps. And that's the story that Microsoft is putting out there for partners.
And in terms of who is really going to be championing Viva inside of an organization, what kind of roles do you see playing that champion?
Yeah. Now, that's going to depend on which module as well. Obviously, Viva Learning is going to be the knowledge manager, the learning manager. You have Viva Connections, which a lot of times is going to be the admins, actually, because you're basically showing your intranet, or your communications manager, intranet manager, who's showing that. For Viva Insights, that's where it gets a bit hazy for me. Also, I have not dug as deep into Insights, but usually any manager or above who wants to see how their team is performing, they would want to see or have insights. Now, it's already been used with workplace analytics that's been out there for a while, so it's not really something new. It's just now being packaged in a different way and being served through Teams. Viva Topics, I'll tell you that some big companies have gone headfirst into it. One thing that I will say that they're realizing is that there is a lot of work. You're talking about creating topics and then maintaining those things over the long term. And an analogy that comes to mind always in my mind, Jason, is think about Wikipedia articles. Wikipedia is huge, and there's so many volunteers around the world that manage Wikipedia. Well, you might have a Wikipedia directly within your company as the different topics that you're managing, and it all interconnected and all, and you have to manage that as a company, and knowledge managers and others in the company. So that's a pretty big task. Now the reward is huge there as well, just like we know that Wikipedia and how it serves us is amazing, but there is a lot of work to maintain it.
And to what am I trying to say? To do it in a way that is sustainable,
Exactly.
and that takes an approach that people can work with over time. Not just one big push and then leave it. Yeah. So interesting point. And yeah, it certainly does. Well, I guess what I'd be looking for is I know Microsoft made tried to make a splash with it this week, but I think this is going to be a long haul to see, can they build up the momentum? Can they get enough people enthused across their customer base to add this almost on top of everything else? And you mentioned Teams as a key component here, and maybe this is my attempt at a segue, but if there was one other thing I would say about Ignite in the business applications and productivity side of things, it was really Microsoft flexing its muscles around Teams. This is become so pervasive in their, I think, view of not just the present but the future, that they want to make sure everyone knows that Teams is really touching everything on both the productivity and the app side.
True. And if we actually zoomed out even more, from the first keynote, the CEO Satya Nadella, then after that, Jared Spataro and Scott Guthrie, and all of them, the main theme or themes I should say, that I picked up was first the Microsoft Cloud, and within the Microsoft Cloud, pre-built components such as Teams, which of course resides on top of SharePoint and sits in the Microsoft Cloud, and then also building on top of Microsoft Cloud. So getting people, not just developers, but also non-developer power users to build on top of the Microsoft Cloud using Power Platform components, Power Automate, Power BI, Power Apps, and even Power Virtual Agents. So there was a huge emphasis on the cloud. They also have specific clouds created for retail industries. So there's, I believe, Microsoft Cloud for manufacturing, financial services, healthcare, nonprofit, retail, all these different clouds that would be automatically, you know, I think what's the word, made to measure is the phrase that they use, where it's going to
Mm-hmm.
be almost there, almost to your requirement because of your industry. And then you take it and then you kind of wiggle it around and change some stuff and it's ready to go. So Microsoft is going into verticals with these industries and saying to everybody that, hey, Microsoft Cloud basically can solve all your problems. And that was a huge emphasis I noted as an undertone of the whole entire Ignite conference.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, it's a little bit of like a something for everything message, but in the sense that, yes, a lot of, like, you take Scott Guthrie, what he kind of, and he kind of does his, I don't know if he always does it this way, but kind of he ends up doing sort of a bit of a laundry list of like, here's this service, and here's this, and I personally don't get a ton from that. I'm sure it's very informative to other people, but some of that is really for admins, IT experts, developers. But like you said, there's this layer now that's very clearly communicated that there is something for everyone else to take from that, to either, build your own sort of low code elements that tie directly in with a more sort of low level service, or that, that your IT team can work with you to incorporate somehow. That really, as you said, and the other one, I guess, that maybe we can talk a bit about too was Loop. I mean, you talk about building Powerapps, but now you can also, I think Loop enters the conversation as what is sort of the next iteration of the fluid framework.
Yeah, the fluid components, they use words like collaborative canvas and
Mm-hmm.
so forth. Now, we've seen stuff like that actually for a while in different, quote unquote commercials coming out from Microsoft. And this was the ultimate unveiling of it, where you go together in one canvas, almost like a
Mm-hmm.
OneNote together, and you can see the actual other mice, I should say, hovering, and you see people typing, and you're building tables and putting images and all that kind of stuff. And when you're done doing it together with a team of people, you could take that component, you can surface it anywhere. So in Outlook and Teams and other applications as well. So, but you are
Yeah.
making what's I think described also as atomic units of information, right? Atomic units of information. You're brainstorming together. You're making this thing, and then you're using the same component again and again, kind of like
Right.
a part of just a web part, or just a part of something.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have personally enough background with it to know how viable that is. I feel like I feel like it's the kind of announcement that, I've heard software companies make over and over, for forever, and some of them probably work well and some of them don't. I
Mhm.
feel a little in the dark though about knowing how much, how excited I should be about that one. I don't know. Do you have an opinion on that, on Loop versus, say, the opportunity for building Power
Yeah.
Apps?
Well, the opportunity makes a lot of sense. I myself find recreating components from app to app. And if I
Mm-hmm.
could reuse components that I've created once in various apps, it just makes sense. And on top of that, of course, it would be dynamic components. So if I make a change in one place, the same exact change appears in all other places as well. So
Mm-hmm.
the idea makes a lot of sense. Now, the execution, as you're saying, also, it's all going to depend on how well they execute this vision. But the vision itself makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Uh, yeah, and I think it came up to me in the context that I was seeing Luke mentioned. It just was that part of this longer list that I was making, as we were getting ready to talk here about just the various ways that, Microsoft sees people talking to each other,
Hmm.
in different roles and different, inside an organization, between organizations. I'm just going to read off a few of the ones that I had in mind for us to talk about, from Dynamics 365 apps to other workers inside your organization who don't have D365, to those all who are on a D365 app, who are Power Platform makers, Power Platform users, chatting with people between Teams and D365, working on Powerapps inside of Teams. I think that's pretty much what I had.
Yeah,
So all these different sort of variations that
yeah,
they're clearly thinking about. I mean, when you talk about sort of the pervasive nature of these things, Teams comes into it quite a bit, either inside of apps, inside of Dynamics apps, or inside of. I'm not sure if it's inside of Power Platform. My matrix, I have to get a full matrix going of all these different permutations, but yeah. I don't know which of those perhaps, and just to
hmm,
the other thing I wrote down was, the quote from Charles Lamanna, which was collaboration, collaboration, collaboration.
that's
I don't know
right.
if that's really a great battle cry, but I think it drives his point home, right? This is really where Microsoft is betting.
Yes, yes, they are. It's a good bet. Once again, the execution, we'll see what happens. But at the end of the day, doesn't matter where you are, you should not have to switch context. Is the main
Mm-hmm.
tone over here. Because, and I'm a big believer, somebody who has actually dug very, very deep inside learning, dug deep inside the whole learning
Right.
space, that every time you switch context as a user, doesn't matter if you're a kid or if you're a senior or anywhere in between, doesn't matter your gender or whatever, it's just a fact that you are going to lose time. You're going to destroy that productivity that you were building once you switch context. That just happens in personal life and business life. So how do you avoid people from switching context? Doesn't matter if they're in the browser or they're in Teams or in Outlook. How does the information come to the user instead of the user going to the information? That's the battle. And it's a hard battle, no doubt about it. And sometimes you really cannot avoid it where you have to go where the information resides. But many times you should be able to contextually get the information you were looking for with contextual experiences that have been created for you. So, as an example, I think you alluded to this already, where if I'm a salesperson, let's say working in dynamics, or I'm working in marketing or customer service or whatever else, I should not have to go to Microsoft Teams to chat and converse. Doesn't matter in a channel or a regular chat to someone within Teams. That should come to me, and that's one of the things that is exciting to me personally, that it is happening. This is the first time actually that Microsoft Teams components are coming to any application. It's always been other way around, where Yammer and SharePoint and Stream and everything else got put into Teams. This time they're taking the Teams components and opening it up, bringing it to Dynamics, which I think is wonderful because
Mm-hmm.
you need that.
I hear what you're saying, and I mean, I don't think any of this is a big surprise. I think for someone who has had their focus on the Dynamics applications, they knew that more Teams integration has been coming. It's been I think I pointed out in one article I wrote this week. I mean, some of this stuff Microsoft has been demoing since 2018. Some of the sales scenarios, for example, that they showed off, where collaborating in teams where all the different people in the organization aren't in the D365 app, don't have licenses for it, even, that you can work on some of those business issues outside of it and whatever. It looks obviously a lot closer now. It's not 100% there, but I think there's no question that, I mean, I think it feels to me like Microsoft said, how can we show that we are 100% focused on making Teams as integral everywhere in the company as we can, and that's our product strategy. That's what it felt like seeing
It did.
the very, the
Yeah. And the only risk that I see, Jason, though, here, that Teams, I don't know how much do you use it, but I use it all the time. And I feel
I do use it.
sometimes it gets, yeah, sometimes it gets a little sluggish, a little bit slow, and the switching is not that easy. And That's the other hope that I have for Microsoft, if Microsoft ever is going to listen to
Hmm.
this podcast, that please make it more swift, better, and not as bloated. There's a new version of Teams also that's being put into Windows 11, but that's only for personal accounts. So you got your work accounts that's going to be in the regular Teams, and then you have your personal Teams. So it's two different version of Teams that's going to be there in Windows 11, believe it or not. And that, I don't know
Mm.
about you, but I think that's not a great idea. It does not simplify the
Yeah.
story; it kind of complexifies it, which I'm all for simplifying things personally.
Yeah, I definitely hear you on that. And anytime I've seen scenarios, maybe like what comes to mind is like healthcare patient scenarios where it's you're a patient, but you're joining a Teams call, and it's like,
Yeah,
well, if you're a regular person who's not, and it's something called Teams, and I think that there you're
exactly.
getting to muddy the waters a bit, and maybe the tech is useful, but yeah, that's the kind of thing that makes me raise my eyebrows a bit, that they're stretching it too far.
Yeah,
Um,
same here. I mean,
but
I'm looking at my desktop right now, and I got OneDrive and OneDrive for Business. Like, why? Why don't I have just
yeah,
one OneDrive? It's just one drive. Why
yeah.
is it two drives? you know?
That's one of Microsoft's Achilles heels historically, is some of that branding and pushing, trying to shape things where it's not always a perfect fit. But the
Yeah.
enthusiasm's there for it internally. Yeah. What else? I think well, I don't know how much we want to get into this side of it, but I think one of the things I'm personally going to be looking for is how the licensing stories shake out around Teams versus Power Platform usage
hmm
versus Dynamics licensing. Microsoft has made some sort of broad statements about that, and they did make some updates to allotments of like Power Platform API calling, where they
hmm
become a little more generous. So I'm certainly going to try to learn more about that. Is that something that you've paid attention
Yeah.
to at all? Yeah.
So when Power Apps first came out, long, long, long time ago. Even before. Let's go a little bit before Power Apps. InfoPath was the main contender for the whole form story, and I was super deep, by the way, in InfoPath. I've written books on it, literally. Now, when Power Apps came out, everybody was super excited about it, and so was I. But what happened was the licensing was pretty heavy. And then they played around with the licensing back and forth, and it just never worked out. Now, not that long ago, as you know, they went from $20, I believe, to $5 for the licensing, and then now there's a pay as you go model that was introduced
Right.
recently,
Mm-hmm.
which is wonderful. I think that's a great right step if you want to get that traction in Power Apps, because the actual usage of Power Apps within the Dynamics 365 model driven Canvas apps, and also within Microsoft 365, just building forms, the real life, the role based forms, task based forms. There's so much you could do with it. So why restrict it so much? I think they're going in the right direction for that, because the licensing has prevented usage of it broadly. Now, actual making of the Power Apps, I got to tell you, me being in InfoPath so deep before, and then I got into Power Apps. If I compared apple to apple here, I think Power Apps is still a little bit more intimidating for people. So I come from a developer background myself. So as a developer going into this, it was not as intimidating, but I was speaking, and I still do speak with a lot of end users and power users who never had that background. For them, it's still difficult to get in there. So that I would definitely advise Microsoft, if they would listen, that we got to make it easier for people. If you
Mm-hmm.
want to elevate the story in such a way that, let's not get more technical developers, instead make the product simpler, that more people can actually build on it, then the product itself has got to be simpler as well for them to do so.
Right. Yeah. It's a constant critique that you hear. On the one hand, it can be very constructive, like what you're just saying, and they get pinged, but they do also get pinged for it by analysts. I think even I've heard other MVPs note that licensing can have complexity or confusion around it, or perception can hurt competitive situations. In terms of which business applications to use, and going to a competitor because they feel that this is too opaque or
Yep,
too difficult to achieve. So it's a real concern
it
that
is.
I think that, yeah. What else? I felt like we couldn't have this discussion if we didn't at least utter the word metaverse.
You got
I'm
it.
not as a a media person, I try not to chase the trends, and it's like the last thing I thought I would be talking about, but I was like, we have to at least mention it here.
Yeah.
I'll share my first take. So it seems to be, it's just a fun thing to talk about. If you're going to really ask me what I think about it right now, that's the first part of it. It's a nice idea. It's certainly interesting. It's got obviously from Facebook's sort of buzz. It sort of is in the ether right now. People are hearing it, the term. Microsoft's ideas around it, I think they actually did a fairly decent job of trying to tie together something that they can define, saying that it's designed for both personal and business or commercial representations of the world, right? So on the one hand, one big thing people are holding up is this mesh for teams, which I don't personally want to talk that much about, but then the other is this idea, I think, of digital twins, and the sort of, to me, is more interesting personally, the sort of the business and I guess industrial cases for this concept. So I don't know, did anything else catch your eye or your ear in this area?
I'm definitely a fan, that's for sure.
Okay.
Even before you probably saw this movie also, Ready Player One in 2018 that came out,
Yeah.
right? Wonderful movie. I watched it a couple of times just because, the ideas in it is so mind blowing, and it just makes sense that it has to be the next thing. Obviously, in 2018, when I was watching that movie, I had no idea that COVID was going to be a thing in 2020. And then when it did hit, and now we're still going through it, we're still not out of the woods yet. I gotta say that all these technological advancements which were like, oh, it's going to be decades from now. I think everything got accelerated. Now, having said that, doesn't mean that it's going to happen tomorrow or next year or even 5 years from now. But having so much money and so much effort and brain power being put behind it from Facebook, which is now called Meta, right, and Microsoft, everybody going towards that focus, it makes me excited to just think about how how and when will we get there, and when we get there, what is it going to look like. There was one simulated environment that they showed from Accenture. I don't know if you saw that one too, where the onboarding and all. And honestly, I don't know if I don't think you and I talked about this, but I actually worked at Accenture back in the day, what it was called Anderson Consulting back in 1998.
Sure.
And when they became Accenture, I was there with the actual thing, and I did the onboarding and all. So some of the things it was crazy. Even after 22 years now, or 23 years after, I'm like, wow. So I remember some of these experiences actually, but I remember them in a physical setting. That they were showing, just some of the stuff that they were doing, just some of the similarities. And I was just thinking out to myself that, wow, if this became just completely virtual, would it be the same exact experience? The answer is obviously no. There's no way that you could take a place of the physical experience. But having said that, if you could do this virtually with anyone in the world, right? Does that become a story that's compelling, not just onboarding but working and all in a metaverse where, like you said, you have digital twins of people, places, things. You have immersive spaces like the one they showed where you're creating human experiences, but you're making the human experiences virtually, being together without being physically together, right? Yeah, I think the ideas make a lot of sense. It is still one of those things in the quote unquote in the cloud, no pun intended, or maybe pun intended over here. But it's going to be a while. But the idea really excites me, and just the amount of effort and money, like I said, being put forward from Microsoft and Facebook makes me hopeful that it will be sooner rather than later.
And to your point, I mean, perhaps part of what I hear from you, it's that kind of enthusiasm that you're expressing about it, and that sort of hope for what it could be. I think that will drive. If it's going to succeed, that's what's going to drive it forward. Not people like me saying "bah," but people who really care about it and making it a reality, or in that sense. I guess the other thing I'm taking away as far as it on the industrial side, this is probably again a bigger discussion in and of itself, but the idea of digital twins, I think it's really interesting. I actually have another podcast episode coming out soon really focused on manufacturing and digital twin, and we talk about digital twins. But I got the sense that inside of Microsoft now, this term digital twin is starting to become sort of the replacement term for any sort of simulation, which I think is dangerous because I think that sells it short for what the kind of the bigger vision of that of it is in in supply chains or in complex IT environments, perhaps, or even maybe a manufacturing scenario, like a factory floor scenario, perhaps also complex systems where you're really mimicking it or representing it in a digital way. And I feel like they're getting into this gray area where any simulation of and machine learning, perhaps modeling, is now being called that, which I think is. But anyway, I think that's a very interesting area because to me it's a little more discrete. It's a real. I mean, not that what you were describing wasn't. What you were describing was a huge computational challenge.
It is.
In addition to everything else about it, imagining it and actually making it compelling as a product or as a experience. But that's the one I'm paying a little closer attention to, I would say.
So, I think about these two realities where you got the augmented reality and then you have the virtual reality, right? And they both have a place. I think we're talking here more about the virtual reality of a situation where metaverse, you're kind of entering a different world altogether. Everything that was physically around you disappears and you're somewhere else. But having said that, the augmented reality, there's some amazing applications of that as well. I've seen and experienced actually some of that at a conference. I'm not sure if it was a Microsoft conference or a different one where I put on the headset and I actually did certain things where it said, okay, pull this lever, do this thing, and do that thing. The voice was in my head. The actual diagrams and all these simulations were in front of me because of that. And then I'm thinking, is this AI that's talking to me? And it was actually a person from somewhere sitting somewhere telling me what to do. And just the experience when you're actually doing it, it feels real. It becomes real for you. Like, wow, this could be a doctor or mechanic or, whatever kind of a frontline worker doing this thing. This is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
It's going to be a reality. I have no doubt about it. Both things, and I am enthusiastic about both of those paradigms. But I have no, I know that it's going to take a long time. It's not going to be where it feels like, oh yeah, it's going to be tomorrow or it's going to be next year. That's not going to happen. Like you said, there's a lot of computational power, a lot of other things that need to be thought out before it's going to be a reality.
Yeah. When I see, and I've also tried the HoloLens at least. I think it was an older version of it, but I had a similar experience. Yeah, it was very impressive. And from what I've heard, if anything, it's rolling out even more slowly than it could in terms of getting more devices out to more organizations. I think it's one of the most encouraging things is that, to me anyway, the sort of packaged HoloLens applications that Microsoft has created, guides and remote assist type of stuff, and I'm actually a little unclear right now how they're packaging those different different products, but those are very real. And companies like, I think they demonstrated Toyota this week, and there was a big sort of rollout of Mercedes-Benz dealerships for service issues of HoloLenses. Those are very sort of vanilla use cases of HoloLens with these sort of pre-built apps, and that's huge, I think, for Microsoft that they can build a basic kind of a solution, and that various kind of support and service organizations can then use it either or for training, for manufacturing training too. Yeah, and that from what I've heard from other partners, there are tons of uses for HoloLens, even if it's a smaller company with just buying 3 of them. That's very viable. I think there's other challenges. Can you get your hands on them? Can you sort of, get them set up and deployed? But yeah, if anything, I think they've probably been going out the door more slowly than they could out into the world. Well, anything else you wanted to call attention to here? We've covered kind of a lot of things, thrown a lot of opinions around, but also, you've shared some good experiences too. What else do you have on your radar?
When I was listening to all the announcements, and I've heard many of them before. Also, being an MVP, we were in some sessions which we could not talk about under NDA. But when you hear it a second and third time, things become a little more clear as to what once again the undertone of the whole messaging is. And to me, it definitely starts with the Microsoft Cloud as the overarching umbrella for everything. But then you look at the cloud, you look at the software that you're using on the cloud, and then even the hardware. There was a big emphasis on the Surface devices, right? You have the Surface laptop, which I have one also, works great. Surface Duo, which actually I don't think has made as much traction as it could have. And there's other devices like that also. So it's almost an ecosystem that is coming together where you could do everything that you want within the Microsoft ecosystem, and kind of reminds me in parallel to what Apple has done, right? Where you can just live inside the ecosystem and do whatever you need to there. The only thing I would recommend to Microsoft is please stay open and don't become a walled garden, which I feel Apple has become. Just my humble opinion. So it's got to be the interoperability has to be there. Where yes, I have all these devices and all these software and cloud and everything else I'm doing with Microsoft, but I can extend out and get to anything else and pull other stuff in. That it currently is there, and I hope it remains there long term as well.
Very good. Well, Asif, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me about this. It's a lot of fun topics and a lot to just keep watching, right? I mean, this is
Yeah,
certainly not the end of anything. We'll have another, Ignite at some point in the future to perhaps review once again and see how far we've come.
absolutely. Hopefully, next time Ignite is in person, it would be nice, or maybe it'll be the metaverse. You never know.
You never know. That's true.
Uh,
Great. Thanks again for being here.
my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. My thanks once again to Asif Rehmani for joining me today. I'll put links in the show notes to his LinkedIn bio and the Visual SP website. If you want to get in touch with me, you can reach me by email, jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. You can also follow us for all of our updates on LinkedIn and on Twitter. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World, signing off.